Is that a gram?
New card. What do you think?
Whoa. Very nice.
Picked them up from the printers yesterday.
Good coloring.
That's bone.
Hey guys, welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a 2022 movie, and that is Thor Love and Thunder, the fourth instalment of the Thor franchise within the ever-expanding Marvel Cinematic Universe. Sees Thor Odinson embarking on a journey unlike anything he's ever faced, a quest for inner peace. However, his retirement gets interrupted by Gorr the God Butcher, a galactic killer who seeks the extinction of all gods. To face this threat, Thor enlists the help of his Cronin buddy Korg and the newly appointed King of Asgard, Valkyrie, as well as his ex-girlfriend Jane Foster, who, to his surprise, inexplicably wields his magical hammer. Together they set out on a harrowing cosmic adventure to uncover the mystery of the God Butcher's vengeance. So Love and Thunder is the latest big screen movie to be in Marvel's Phase 4, and this was definitely one of the ones that I was most anticipating because, like most MCU fans, Ragnarok is definitely one of the better Marvel movies that we have got, and with Taika Waititi coming back as well as a lot of the same sort of cast and crew, it definitely seemed like this was definitely going to be very similar to what we got with Ragnarok. But with each new instalment of Phase 4, my excitement was definitely starting to get tested a little bit, because there was a lot of the movies in Phase 4 haven't really blown me away. A lot of the projects within Phase 4 haven't really been as good as I was hoping they could be. I was wishing that Thor Love and Thunder was going to be like one of the best movies so far. I really love Taika Waititi's movies. I haven't seen every single one of them, but What We Do in the Shadows and Hunt for the Wilder People and Ragnarok, I really enjoyed those movies, so I was really looking forward to seeing what it was that he could bring to a sequel to Thor. And I'd even say What We Do in the Shadows is one of my go-to Halloween movies, because it is just something that I just have to put on because it is so enjoyable. And it certainly looked like it was going to be quite a big breath of fresh air, similar to what Miss Marvel was to the TV shows on from Disney Plus. This seems to be sort of combating a lot of the more darker stories that we have been getting up until this point. But when it came to Thor Ragnarok, it sort of felt more like a mix of both the more serious and comical elements that were sort of blended together, because to me it sort of felt like what that movie was trying to do was kind of bridge the gap between the Avengers and the Guardians, which is definitely a lot more sort of light-hearted and fun. This one is a full-on comedy, and I'm not quite sure if that's the direction that they should have gone with this one, because there are definitely a lot of dark elements to it. There's a lot of serious subject matter when it comes to the villains, and especially Jane's story. It just felt like having this be a lot more comedic, it just sort of took away from a lot of those elements, and personally I think this should have been a lot darker. So when it comes to the cast for this movie, we have Chris Hemsworth returning once again as Thor, we've got Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie, Taika Waititi, the director, playing Korg, plus the return of Natalie Portman as Jane Foster, as well as Russell Crowe playing the Greek god Zeus, and Christian Bale who's playing Gorr the God Butcher. For the returning cast, it definitely feels like everyone seems quite comfortable in their roles, and I feel like especially with Natalie Portman, who does seem a lot more at ease with the role that she's been given, which is definitely a lot more expanded. She is given a lot more to do rather than just being like the love interest, which there's still elements of that in there. There's echoes of the past with what she got up to in Thor and the Dark World, but the way that they've gone with her I think is definitely an interesting direction. I think that Natalie Portman was definitely a lot better in this one than she was previously. I've also got to admire just how much she bulked up for this role, because she really did work out for this role, and the set pictures of her before they started filming, she looked incredible in shape. I know they did do a little bit of a touch up here and there to make her look a little bit taller, and I think that they did make her arms look a little bit bigger. I don't know whether that was throughout the movie or whether that was in reshoots, because there are pictures of her actually with the motion tracking dots along her arms. But I did like her a lot more in this role. I don't necessarily think that comedy is her strongest angle when it comes to performing, but I do think that she is a lot better in this movie than she was in the past. But a big problem is that when it comes to the writing side and the characterizations, most of the cast aren't really given enough to really sort of do with their characters outside of like the main central ones. When it comes to Thor himself, I think, yeah, Chris Hemsworth, I absolutely love him in the role. I've loved seeing him grow and seeing the character get explored a lot more and seeing different sides to him over the years. But honestly, they've kind of turned him into a bit of an idiot in this one. This feels really regressive, because this is more like what he was back at the start of the very first Thor movie. This is not the one who's lost so much over all these years, and the one who's literally just come out of Infinity War and Endgame. It just doesn't feel like it's the same character. He's got great chemistry with everyone. I mean, Chris Hemsworth is effortlessly likeable, especially when it comes to his relationship with Jane. I definitely think that the two of them definitely have better chemistry this time around. And I definitely buy into the love story a little bit more this time, especially with, like, I'm not going to be getting too into spoilers for this one because there's not really much to really spoil for this one. One of the things that they do sort of show is they show little flashbacks of their time together and like eventually what sort of led to their breakup before Ragnarok. Those two together are genuinely really good, and I did actually like seeing that side of them. And when it comes to Natalie Portman's new status quo within the MCU, it definitely makes a lot more sense now that those flashbacks have been included, because they do answer a few questions that people did have when the trailers were released. I'll buy into it. I think that it's answered pretty well. It's just maybe they should have done a bit more with it. I did like that she was a little bit naive, and there was definitely an inexperience to the, you know, because she's never really been like superhero, so there's like scenes where she's like trying to come up with catchphrases and things like that. But I feel like they could have done a bit more with it, because she is just a scientist and that's all she's ever really been in these movies. So her sort of transitioning from that into a full-on fighter who can kind of wield Mjolnir in the same way that like Captain America was, I just feel like they could have done a little bit more with that, because I feel like having her sort of learning and maybe like Thor maybe helping her as well and seeing their chemistry develop, I think that might have actually worked a little bit better. And then when it comes to Valkyrie and Korg, they don't really have much to really sort of offer to this movie, because they're really just there purely because they were in the last one, and I was just expecting so much more from them. I was expecting some sort of exploration of who those characters were, and they do a little bit with Korg, but that's really it. And I was just hoping that they were going to do a lot more with those characters. The runtime for this is just under 2 hours, and it's not enough time to really sort of explore everything. There's rumours that apparently this movie was like 4 hours long, and Jeff Goldblum and Peter Dinklage and even Lena Headey was supposed to be in it as well, but all that stuff was cut, removed, and this is kind of what we've been left with. And I would imagine that Christian Bale's screen time is definitely shortened down a lot. Gorr the God Butcher is the villain of this movie. He's the driving force of everything that's going on, because his history, his past, which you do see, you do sort of understand where it is he's coming from. His setup is brilliant. I love his motivation, and I think it's definitely something that you can understand. You don't condone what it is that he's doing, but you can definitely get behind it. But then he starts becoming a bit goofier towards the middle, and I think even though what he's sort of saying is that gods are selfish, they only care about themselves, and then he's like kidnapping people to draw the gods out because they know they can't stop themselves from helping people, which is really contradictory. It doesn't really make sense. I really like Christian Bale in this role. I think he does bring something to this character. He does have this really sort of creepy presence to him. I love the effects that they do with like his skin, where he's all like really pale and there's like a lot of darkness around him. He can kind of like blur in and out of shadows, and all you see is like the yellow of his eyes. I think the performance that Christian Bale gives is really good. It's just that his screen time is so limited to the point where you're only actually seeing killing one god on screen, and that's really bad for a character who's called the God Butcher. I would expect scenes of him absolutely massacring people. It's like one scene where I was fully expecting like this huge action sequence with Gorr kind of being like right in the centre of it, but they don't even do that. That's one of the changes that I would definitely make to this movie. There's a sequence where they visit a place called Omnipotent City, which is where all the gods kind of go to hide, hang out, orgies. Oh, there's so many orgy references in this movie. You know, there's a lot of people saying that, oh, it's quite a childish movie, so maybe it's more geared towards kids, but then you have jokes like that sort of thrown into it, and it's like, there's a line that you don't really cross when it comes to kids movies. If it's subtle, like Wallace and Gromit curses away a rabbit, and you have Wallace who's like become human again, he's not wearing any clothes, so Gromit hides is downstairs in a box, and on the front of it says caution may contain nuts. You can get away with that in a kids movie because that will fly over their head, but the adults will get it. When you start joking about stuff like orgies, I think that does kind of cross the line. They did do it in Ragnarok, but again, I don't really consider these to be kids movies as such. That was it before I trailed off there. Yeah, because Thor, Valkyrie, the mighty Thor Korg, they all travel to this city where all the gods are. And it was just primed for an absolutely amazing battle sequence with Gorr taking over and just slaughtering them within a PG-13 constrained way, but they kind of get away with that a little bit. I really was expecting something along those lines, and they just don't do it. There's very little threat from a lot of the villains in this movie because, as I said, with Gorr you barely really see him. It's kind of muddled what his actual goal is because it just seems to be sort of getting somewhere and that's really it, rather than just going out and just killing all the gods that he can find. But then like the Russell Crowe's Zeus is definitely sort of being primed for a big threat going forwards for Thor, and they can't take him seriously at all. I feel like it was just the jokey side to him. I think it could have worked a little bit better, but there's no way that you are setting up like this really big evil threat. So he's not necessarily evil, but just like a threat that can actually challenge Thor, because they're just completely making fun of him throughout the entire time. That sequence is not serious, it's just all jokes. If they are going forwards with another Thor movie and Zeus, the Greek gods, are like the big threats in it, it's not going to really sort of bother me too much because I don't think that any of these characters are actual threats. The story for this movie does have a lot of potential. There are so many different elements that they could really do a great emotional story, especially with Gorr and his story and his desire to wipe out the gods because of what they did to him, and then with all the stuff with Jane, because yes, they are following the Mighty Thor comic storyline where she does have cancer and her connection to Mjolnir is kind of the thing that's helping her but sort of not at the same time. And there are some brilliant emotional moments that they can set up and they do try to actually go there, but it just gets completely lost in all the jokes. Tonally, this movie is an absolute mess because it's trying to be dark and serious, but then it tries to be really light and jokey. And those scenes just keep undercutting each other. That to me is the biggest contrast between this movie and Ragnarok, because Ragnarok knew when to hold back and allow those emotional character moments. This movie doesn't really do that. Admittedly, there is one sequence in Ragnarok which I would have thought they would have treated a bit more seriously, which is the destruction of Asgard, but then the cracking jokes afterwards. It feels like that throughout most of this movie. So by the time you get up to that, these really big emotional moments that should have you in absolute floods of tears, it doesn't hit. If the movie was longer, if those sequences were treated with a bit more depth and a bit more of a darkness to them and a lot more serious, those emotional beats would have hit and they would have worked so much better. The performances are really great in those moments, but they're just undercut by all this light, jokey stuff. A really good example of this is, without really sort of spoiling it, there's a sequence where Thor meets up with an old friend. It should be quite an emotional moment. It looks as though this might be the last time that Thor ever sees them. And again, he's making jokes about it. And it sort of undercuts that sort of emotion that you are supposed to feel in that moment, and it just doesn't work for me. And when it comes to the comedy itself, I'm quite split on it because not a lot of the jokes really sort of landed for me, especially my audience. I didn't go on opening night, I wasn't able to, but my audience that I was with, they barely laughed at all. There was like a few moments here and there. There was like one or two moments with the goats and stormbreakers. I don't know, jealousy of Mjolnir, which I don't understand. Those sequences definitely got bigger laughs than pretty much any other scenes, and it's a bit annoying that most of those clips were actually released online before the movie came out. As I said, some of it is quite humorous. I do like the stormbreaker moment, like the first time it happens, where Thor's trying to summon Mjolnir back and then Stormbreaker like drifts into shot behind him. That's funny, that does work quite well, but they just take it too far and it just keeps going on, and I just feel like they didn't need to do that. And last I checked, I'm pretty sure Mjolnir and Stormbreaker were just weapons. They don't have personalities and they don't react to things around them. Let's get off the comedy. When it comes to the visuals of this movie, I think it is shot very well. There's definitely a few sequences that are like directly out of the comics. They look fantastic, especially there's a sequence where Thor travels to the Shadow Realm and all the colour gets completely faded and it's just black and white, and these really amazing effects where like the light from Mjolnir and other objects that they've got sort of like bring out the colour a little bit. It's a really cool effect and I really love how that looks, and especially that with all the stuff with Gorr, the way that they sort of play around with shadows and just the way that he's sort of like able to sort of like blend into the background, and like there's even like a pretty nice little jump scare which it didn't get me, but it definitely got a few people in my audience. It is really good, and I do think visually this is one of the better Thor movies. Action sequences, yeah, like most Marvel movies, it does have some really good, really fun, really entertaining action sequences that makes full use of the different powers and varieties of things that these characters have. I think the new ways that they use Mjolnir is quite interesting. I really like that effect that they do use. And I like that there's a variety of opponents that Thor goes up against, including a load of monsters as well as Gorr and other gods. So it does help keeping those scenes interesting, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of weight behind them and there's very little stakes to them. The concept of death in the MCU is quite elusive, and this movie is definitely one of the culprits for that. And then when it comes to the effects, this is kind of in the middle for me. I think that some of the effects do look pretty good, but a lot of them did need improvement, and the VFX artists didn't have enough time to actually do this one. If you want to see kind of my thoughts on that whole situation, I did talk a lot about it in my Miss Marvel review, so I'm going to put a link to that down in the description. But yeah, when it comes to this movie, some of the effects do work, some of them don't. There's a sequence very early on where you see Thor growing up, and again, I do like the sequence. I think it is quite funny, but then you actually see like baby Thor. It's not quite as bad, but it's almost on par with the baby from Twilight. It just does not look good at all. But then there's another sequence where it involves this character that Doctor Strange fans are definitely going to be familiar with. I won't say who, but like what they do with him is really clever. I do like how they have captured what the comics really sort of make him look out to be. And I love like the worlds that he sort of exists in, because it does look really good. Visually it's very different from what we've seen in the MCU before. It did remind me quite a bit of Kingdom Hearts 3. There is a level that is very similar to it, and that was the first thing that went through my head when I saw it. And again, visually it does look really good, and I think that's where some of the effects really do hold up, and I do think that is where some of the effects are actually really good. I don't often talk about the pacing in movies because it's not normally something that I really need to sort of bring up. When it comes to this one, it's not helped by the edit because there are a lot of things that are missing. It is quite chopped up at times, and the pace does feel a little bit too fast. And as I said earlier, there was like talk that this movie was like 4 hours long, and the thing is, we have actually seen behind the scenes footage of other scenes being filmed that aren't in the movie, one of which is pretty important, and that's Natalie Portman actually becoming Mighty Thor for the first time, because behind the scenes footage actually shows her up in a harness on wires transforming, but that's not in the movie. They just completely cut it out. This film, with the story, with the character arcs, with everything that they are trying to do, it needed to be longer. It needed to be a lot bigger as well. It is quite a small focused story, but I feel like what they are trying to tell, it did need to be a lot bigger, and it needed to be so much more epic. One of the things that I have been praising quite a lot throughout Phase 4 are the costumes, because I think that they really have absolutely nailed the look of every single character. I don't think this one's any different. I feel like what they do with the Mighty Thor, with Valkyrie, even Sif, who does have an appearance in this, they look great. I genuinely love how they've adapted those costumes. Thor's one I'm a little divided on. I think it's maybe a little bit too colourful. I've always kind of liked the darker black sort of look that he's got with like the gold sort of panels. Like the one that he had in Dark World is probably my favourite. But the way that they've sort of like made it a bit more like a gold and blue sort of look. It's a bit odd, and I don't like the helmet that they went for because it just looks really strange. I don't see why they can't just use the helmet that they had in the first movie, which was absolutely perfect. But the weird thing is though, they go through all this trouble of designing this helmet which covers half his face. It's got like these really big wings on the side, and then he takes it off after about a minute. That sequence that they show in the trailer of him meeting Jane where he's wearing it, that's the only time he wears it. He takes it off immediately afterwards, and it's like, why was that in the film? It just seemed absolutely pointless. But overall, I do like the costumes. I do think they look good. Maybe they just need to sort of hold back on the design of them a little bit, because I think especially with Thor, I think maybe they sort of overdid it just a little bit. The soundtrack I actually really like. It's surprisingly from Michael Giacchino, who's worked on the Spider-Man Home trilogy. He's worked on Doctor Strange. He does a lot of Pixar movies. He's one of my favourite composers, so I was quite surprised actually seeing that he was the one who scored this one, because it doesn't really sound like something that he would do. And in fairness, he wasn't the only composer who actually worked on this movie. He also had Nami Malumad, so maybe that's why it doesn't necessarily sound like something that Michael Giacchino would do. But I do really love the blend of like the slightly cinematic orchestral sort of Thor theme that you have had in the past, mixed with like this almost like a glam rock sort of styled music to it. I really love that blend. I do think it is definitely one of my favourite soundtracks from Phase 4. And even though I said it doesn't really sound like a Michael Giacchino soundtrack, there are echoes of things like Far From Home in here, particularly like Mysterio's theme and S.H.I.E.L.D. It does sound quite similar to a few of the Spider-Man soundtracks that he has done. I really did like it. I think it is a really good soundtrack, and it does suit this movie really well. And I also wasn't really expecting how many songs were going to be in this one as well, because this is almost verging on like Guardians territory for how many songs do actually appear in it, even though the Guardians are barely in the movie, despite what the advertisement and marketing would have you believe. The music really does enhance a lot of the sequences that they are used in. I really do like the songs that they do use. There is Guns N' Roses, they do use the songs from the trailers. I was expecting something along the lines of like a Rocky montage sort of soundtrack to when he's getting fitting into shape, but they end up going with an Enya song, which doesn't really fit with what I was hoping it would be. I was just sort of hoping for like this really cheesy, like over the top, like Eye of the Tigers kind of thing. But no, they stick with this Enya song. The only time that I've actually heard that song within a movie that really worked, especially in an action movie, was Deadpool 2. But overall, the soundtrack, the music, the songs, it really does work well. It definitely adds to the aesthetic of this movie, and I really love what they were able to do. Overall, I do think this is one of the more divisive movies within the MCU, because it is fun, it is enjoyable. I do see a lot of people going into this and having a really good time, but I can't help but feel disappointed with this, because I just feel like there was so much potential for it that they just didn't even bother with. There are elements of those darker moments in this story, but I just don't feel like they really sort of did enough with them. And as a comedy, I just don't think it was as funny as a comedy really should be. But when it comes to the casting, I think everyone's really great. I love the music. I think visually it does look great. The effects needed work, they need time. Overall, it's an okay movie, but it's definitely on the lower end of Phase 4 for me. And with all that being said, my rating for this movie is going to be a 6 out of 10. I think if you're a fan of Ragnarok, I think you will definitely enjoy this one, but I don't think you'll find it as good. I think if you're a hardcore Thor fan, especially of the comics, I don't think you're really going to enjoy this one too much. Casual moviegoers, you're going to have a good time. I don't necessarily think you're going to be really sort of caught up in a lot of like the lore and backstory and stuff like that, so I think that you are definitely going to enjoy it a lot more, and I think that that's probably the best way into actually viewing this movie, as just a fun comedy. But it is one of those movies where a lot of the jokes do get sort of repeated a lot, and if they don't land for you, then they really will grate on you each time they're brought up, especially when it comes to the goats, which are based on a meme from 10 odd years ago. I think there's only like one scene that they're in that did actually make me laugh. Other than that, I wasn't really too happy with it. One thing I do have to bring up before I bring this to an end is I am sort of questioning what Marvel's plans are for Thor going forward, because they've definitely set up a very different status quo for him in the MCU, but I just don't feel like they really sort of have like a natural progression for him, because as I said, this doesn't feel like the same character that we had in Endgame. To me, the Infinity War Endgame Thor is the Thor that I want to see more of. That is the version of the character that I feel is the definitive version of him. There's a drive to him in those movies that just isn't in this one. I feel like that is something that they could have added in. I feel like, as I said, there's a character that you sort of feel might be sort of killed off. I feel like they should have just gone ahead and done it and have them sort of like dying in front of Thor, and that be his motivation for going after Gorr, and actually have his motivation be revenge. It is kind of a repeat of what happened in Infinity War, but it worked really well, and I think that it would definitely drive his story forwards a bit more, and maybe see if like he can maybe move on from that. That could have actually tied into the title a little bit more, because it could have been all about Thor choosing whether he's going to follow the path of love or the path of thunder, violence, revenge. But no, that's not really what the definition of the title is. I think it would have been a lot more relevant to the overall story rather than just something that sort of happened like really late on. But at this point in time, it does feel like Marvel don't really know what to do with Thor, because as I said, they've kind of set him back to where he was at the beginning, so the future is really uncertain when it comes to him. I'm curious the direction that they have gone, because it's definitely not the way that I thought they were going to go. There's something that I thought that they were setting up for this film, which does get sort of cut short right at the end, and it just felt so strange that that's the direction that they're going with, because it felt like they were setting up something else. So I am disappointed that that's the direction that they're going with, and I'm just hoping that wherever Thor goes from here, that it is a lot brighter, and I'm really hoping that it's able to be more better. No, honestly, one of the ideas that I had for this was maybe having it being like a bit of a fetch quest, because Gorr is after something. He kind of desires this all-powerful thing, and I feel like if Thor and Jane and everyone was sort of aware of that from the beginning, what they could have done is have Gorr sort of go into like these different locations, sort of finding clues, and maybe have the gods be the ones guarding it, so you get to see him actually go through them to get his answers. That might have worked a little bit better. It would have added to the desperation that they were in as well. That's again treated a bit more seriously, so it actually feels like there are stakes in this movie. I feel like that's the direction that they could have gone in, and I feel like it would have added to like a race against time kind of element. And I'd also go so far as to say what Gorr is wishing for, what his desire is with this ultimate thing. What he does have going for him in the movie, I don't think is as good as what I think he should have been going for and what he was going to use it for. And I just feel like it could have been a really good twist how it was handled, but the direction they went with it in the movie, I just don't think really sort of clicked well with me. But yeah, I had fun with it. It was an enjoyable movie, but it just wasn't really my favourite. I couldn't help but be a bit disappointed with the direction that they have sort of taken with this franchise. So that's all I can really say with this movie. So it's not the most positive note to end this on, but you know, not all of them will be. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, share this out if you can. If you have any suggestions for movies, TV shows, games that you'd like me to take a look at and do a rewind review for, let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought about the movie. Did you like it? Did you not? Where would you rank it in terms of Phase 4? How would it compare to the Disney Plus series? Let me know all your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See ya.